This is Africa. Let's zoom in. This is South Africa. Specifically, 1984 through 2009. Let's go somewhere around 1990. The cultural conflicts between races: 68.8% black, 17.5% white, and 8.7% colored, and 3.2% Asian people made up the entire population. Well, the government is completely controlled by white people. Naturally, questions do arise. How does a government made up of a minority race maintain power over a whole country? Well, what better way than to make their citizens blame everything on each other? Specifically, make them blame other oppressed races for their own unpleasant situations. Colored people were in conflict with black people because they were told that they were almost white, but the uncivilized black population held them back from gaining the same rights whites had. In all reality, they were never getting those rights. On the other side, the black population started to resent the colored population for having more rights than them just because of their better skin color. While every demographic was busy blaming their problems on each other, the white government happily sipped their wine and remained in power.
Another way the government kept its black and colored populations in check was through the Bantu Education Act. From the very proposal of the act, the people affected, the colored population, wanted it as far away as possible. Why? Well, it taught colored and black children only things that would be useful for the government, like working in factories 101 through 301. The act basically allowed the government to take complete control over the funding, curriculum, and rules of every colored school in the nation, where before, mission schools existed which were allowed at least a little freedom. Looking at it from an outsider's point of view, it's genius. How could your citizens ever rebel if all they are ever taught is how to obey and work? Society at its finest. Now, shifting to a more politically driven conflict, the Zulu and the Xhosa tribes. To properly put this into perspective, we need to go back to when the Dutch first arrived in South Africa. Both tribes reacted in different ways. The Zulu, who were known to be fighters, attacked, while the Xhosa, known to be more logical, tried to find a peaceful intellectual solution. Inevitably, when both methods didn't work out and the Dutch took control of South Africa, they blamed each other, marking the beginning of the Zulu-Xhosa conflict. Both tribes eventually created parties. The Inkatha was the unofficial Zulu party, and the ANC was often called the Xhosa party. What started as a struggle for political power in a foreign governmental institution turned into hate, rampage, and wars between the parties. One notable Inkatha ANC clash was on May 1st, 1991, when a drunken argument turned into 9 deaths and spiraling warfare between the parties. Due to lack of police intervention and continued hatred, these clashes continued and became increasingly more violent. It's time for a discussion! Pause the video now, and we'll begin our discussion question. Take it away, Miss Cack.
Now, only mention the Zulu and Xhosa tribes really isn't doing the diversity of South Africa justice. It is important to note that each of these tribes have their very own unique languages, a factor very important in dividing them, as learning another language for each other's tribes is very difficult, especially under apartheid control. Along with the Zulu and Xhosa tribe, there were the Tsonga, Swazi, Bapedi, North Sotho, Botswana, South Ndebele, Basotho, and Venda. With all these cultural and language barriers, one can see how the Europeans were able to divide the population so well.
Of course, physical division of populations also occurred in South Africa. Going all the way back to 1948, the first relocation acts were passed, which stripped native black South Africans' land away and forced them to move from city centers to rural landscapes or towns. It is estimated that between 1960 and 1985, 3.5 million black and colored South Africans were politely encouraged to move, met with the force of police officers if they didn't. Now, it's not like they only moved a block down or to the house on the next street. In the district of the inner city of Cape Town, black South Africans were moved for more than 20 miles, completely out of the city. Furthermore, the townships provided by the government, to no surprise, lacked infrastructure, funding, and housing. This led to terrible conditions due to the overcrowding and lack of basic utilities such as water and electricity. Even after the apartheid officially ended, Land that was taken by the whites and declared to be white only often stayed like that, as poor townships stayed poor under broken promises of investment in better schools by politicians. And when government funding finally did come in 1994, it only built new infrastructure in the already existing townships, reinforcing the geographical segregation created by apartheid, such as areas like Soweto and especially Alexandria.
Now, what are some aspects of this apartheid we keep mentioning? Well, a way in which the apartheid was enforced was through its many different systems designed to further separate those in society into categories. A way in which this was done was through the pencil hair test. This was a test designed to separate people into three groups: white, colored, and black. Those who participated in this test were to slide a pencil into their hair and let go of it. One would pass the test if the pencil fell to the ground, as white people traditionally had straighter hair that the pencil would pass through. If the pencil were to, say, suck in one's hair, however, then they have failed, and as a result, are legally placed into either the colored or black racial group. For obvious reasons, this test was not scientifically reliable. The varying textures of hair, the wetness of hair, genetic mutations, and just the overall inconsistent nature of hair are some of the many different variables that would immediately discredit the accuracy. Despite the fickle nature of this test, it was treated as definite. The verdicts that resulted from these pencil tests were absolutely absurd. There were many cases in which families were put in completely different racial categories just because of this ridiculous pencil test. These verdicts led to many once close-knit families and communities being demolished overnight. No, you guys aren't families. How could you be family when you're different races?
Moving on, religion, and specifically Christianity in this time, played a significant impact in contrasting ways. At first, the Afrikaners, who were descendants of Dutch settlers, used Christian teachings and justifications to support pro-apartheid reign. However, Christianity played an even bigger role in giving those affected by apartheid hope, tools, and strength. For example, many church institutions and separate denominations from the state allowed their facilities to be used as a place of asylum, speeches, and meetings. Not only did the church physically help anti-apartheid groups, but it helped individuals and local communities unify. If anything, it gave hope and something to believe in when all seemed to crumble by the hand of the government. Through church, sermons, social meetings, Bible study, and more, Christianity brought the people affected by apartheid away from the hate of each other that was so encouraged under apartheid rule. Discussion question. Yay.
Apartheid implemented many oppressive laws into effect. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act and Immorality Act banned interracial marriage and sex. The Indemnity Act legalized police brutality and so forth. When discussing apartheid, many think back to its non-material impacts, but its implementation of apartheid went beyond ideology into the physical world. Exhibit A, Soweto. Soweto was a black township created by the architects of apartheid with the goal of separating and oppressing people of color. The city was designed with only one way in and one way out, so the military could quell any and all rebellion that could possibly arise. Police wore riot gear, and if the police failed to prevent the rebellion, well, the Air Force would have to bomb Soweto. This is just one of the many black townships, and Soweto is an example of just how forward-thinking the apartheid was, and the extent that those enforcing it reached to maintain the suffering of others.
With the absurd poverty present in government-controlled apartheid towns, such as Soweto, a way in which the government kept the impoverished population poor was through land grants. In these ghettos and townships, non-white people were given land to live on, and nothing else. No house, no toiletry, no toilet paper, absolutely nothing. Those living on these land grants were expected to build their homes from the ground up, purchasing each wall individually. They had to build their house brick by brick. Not only did the poor economies of these towns put these people in this unsheltered environment, but the low income made it harder to buy resources and needed to build a home. How could there be a rebellion when most people are still looking for shelter? Now, in the modern day, apartheid has become such an infamous example of a government who institutionalized racial segregation and carried out to such extremes that often similar situations in world history or even modern times are being compared as apartheid-like. For example, Saudi Arabia in present times has been extensively described as a gender apartheid due to its laws against women's rights. Specifically, women are banned from physical education in school, watching sport games, driving, traveling without supervision, or, arguably most apartheid-like, engage in unlawful mixing between the sexes. Especially the last example is very similar to the Immortality Act of 1927, which forbade sex between white people and any other race. Other instances of gender apartheid in the modern day include Afghanistan, Iran, Malaysia, and Pakistan, all spanning through the 21st century and some persisting to today.